Welcome back to another Broken Podcast. I'm Nick Taylor. When we talk about who we are, we usually point to our choices, our personality, or memories. But what if I told you that a lot of who we are starts way earlier, before we even had a chance to choose? Our brains don't come prepackaged, they're built over time in stages. And those stages matter because what happens to us while our brains are wiring up, especially in childhood, leaves marks. Sometimes invisible marks, but marks that change how we see the world, how we react, even how we love. Now, here's the hard truth: trauma doesn't just hurt our feelings in the moment, it literally changes how our brains grow. It rewires our stress systems, it hijacks our emotions, and it can leave us living in survival mode long after the danger is actually gone. That's why two people can go through the same situation, but the one with earlier trauma might carry it differently, heavier, and deeper. Not because they're weak, but because their brains learn to survive instead of thrive. In today's episode, we're diving into the main stages of brain development, and we're going to look at how trauma during those stages can echo into adulthood. I want to break it down in a way that makes sense, not just science for the sake of science, but so you can see how those early cracks in the foundation show up later on in life. And more importantly, how understanding this can help us shift from the question of what's wrong with me to what happened to me and how do I heal. So let's talk about how the brain actually develops. And I'm not going to get too clinical with this because you don't need a neuroscience degree to understand it. Think of it like building a house. You start with the foundation, then the framing, then the wiring, and eventually the finishing touches. Each stage matters. And if something shakes that house while it's being built, it can leave cracks that you carry with you for the rest of your life. Infancy, 0 to 2 years, that sets the foundation. In those first couple years of life, the brain is exploding with growth. This is when we're learning safety, attachment, and trust. The limbic system, the part of the brain that handles emotions and bonding, is wiring up fast. If you grew up in a home where you were loved, held, and cared for, your brain learned the world is safe, people can be trusted. But if you face neglect, abuse, or instability, your brain might have learned the opposite. I'm not safe. I can't rely on anyone. That lesson doesn't just fade, it can echo into adulthood as anxiety, attachment issues, or trouble regulating emotions. Early childhood, from 2 to 6 years, is when the wiring happens. Now, in early childhood, the brain starts wiring up the prefrontal cortex, the part that helps us with impulse control, problem solving, and empathy. This is when kids start learning how to share, how to wait their turn, how to read other people's feelings. But here's the kicker: if trauma shows up during this stage, say through violence in the home, constant fear, or emotional neglect, the brain doesn't get to practice calm, safe social skills. Instead, it gets stuck in survival wiring. That means that later in life, you might struggle with impulsivity, or maybe you're quick to anger, or maybe you find it hard to connect emotionally. It's not just personality, it's development shaped by survival. Middle childhood, 7 to 12 years, that's where the framing happens. By the time kids hit middle school, the brain is building skills for reasoning, memory, and self esteem. This is the age where kids want to feel competent, capable, and connected to others. Trauma at this stage, bullying, unstable home life, loss of a parent, can shake that fragile sense of self. A kid who's constantly in fight or flight mode isn't focused on learning multiplication or building friendships. They're focused on staying safe. And those patterns can follow us into adulthood as low confidence, perfectionism, or always feeling like we're not good enough. And then there's adolescence, which, fun fact, scientists now know doesn't really end until around age 25. This is when the prefrontal cortex, the brain's CEO, is putting the final touches on planning, decision making, and long term thinking. It's also when the brain's reward system goes into overdrive, which is why teens take risks, chase thrills, and sometimes make questionable decisions. Trauma in this stage can hit hard, whether it's violence, instability, toxic relationships, or even war for some of us. It can derail the brain's ability to plan for the future and regulate those risky impulses. That's why trauma survivors often battle with substance use, reckless choices, or difficulty imagining a stable, hopeful future. I think we need to reflect on the adolescent stage and how we now understand that that is between the ages of 13 and 25. As parents, this hits hard in a personal way. When we think about adolescence, it's easy to get frustrated with our teens. The risk taking, the impulsive decisions, the rebellion. But science is giving us a new lens, one our parents didn't see through. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, impulse control, and decision making, isn't fully developed until around the age of 25. That means that a lot of the bad choices our kids are making isn't just defiance. That's literally part of how their brains are wired at the time. And for those of us that lived through childhood trauma, those adolescent years were even more fragile. The decisions we were pushed to make too early on, the risks that we were forced to take without understanding the repercussions, the situations we found ourselves in when we didn't fully understand the impact of our decisions. They shaped how our brains were wired in ways we didn't fully understand at the time. We weren't reckless or irresponsible. Our brains just got stuck in survival mode. So, what does that mean for parenting today? It means slowing down, observing, and understanding. It means creating environments where mistakes are part of learning, where safety isn't just physical, but emotional, and where guidance comes from patience instead of frustration. We can use what we know now about brain development to meet our kids where they are, rather than where we wish they were. And in doing that, we can have the chance to break cycles, to shape a generation that can thrive instead of just survive. So when you look at it across the board, infancy, childhood, adolescence, trauma doesn't just leave scars, it reshapes the blueprint. And unless we understand that, we end up blaming ourselves for patterns that began earlier than we realized. Okay, so we've walked through the stages. Now let's look at what trauma actually does to the brain while it's still wiring up. This isn't just about having bad memories. Trauma physically changes how the brain develops. And once you understand that, a lot of things about your own life or the lives of people you care about start to make sense. When we experience trauma, especially as kids, the brain gets flooded with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. That's the body's alarm system. It's supposed to go off in moments of danger. But if the danger never stops, if the trauma is ongoing, neglect, abuse, constant chaos, then the brain never gets the signal that it's safe again. Instead, it rewires itself to stay on high alert. And here's where it gets wild. Trauma targets three big areas of the brain: the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is the brain's smoke alarm, it detects the threat. Trauma makes it hypersensitive, so even small stressors can feel like danger. The hippocampus, which helps us make sense of memories, can shrink, which is why trauma survivors sometimes feel like their memories are fuzzy, fragmented, or stuck on repeat. And the prefrontal cortex, the part that makes logical decisions, gets weakened. That's why trauma survivors often describe knowing something logically, but still reacting emotionally in a way that they can't control. Put all of that together, and what you get is a brain that's optimized for survival and not for peace. It's like the difference between a smoke detector that only goes off when there's a fire versus one that goes off every time that you make toast. Trauma makes the alarm system way too sensitive. And sure, that can help keep you alive in dangerous situations, but in normal life, it can make relationships, jobs, or even just sitting in a quiet room feel overwhelming. That's why people who've lived through trauma aren't just being dramatic or overreacting. Their brains literally learn to see danger everywhere because at one point, that's what kept them alive. So, what does all this add up to? If trauma disrupts brain development, if it rewires the alarm systems, and it weakens the part of the brains that are meant to regulate and plan, what does that mean for us as adults? The short answer, it shapes mental health in powerful, long lasting ways. A brain that grew up in constant danger is going to carry that forward. That can look like anxiety, panic attacks, or hypervigilance. Always scanning for the next threat, even when you're safe. Your body doesn't believe it. It's exhausting, but it makes sense once you realize the brain was trained to survive. On the flip side, some brains adapt by shutting down instead of staying revved up. That's where depression comes in, feeling numb, disconnected, and hopeless. Because if the brain decides the world is unpredictable and unsafe, sometimes it just shuts off motivation as a way to cope. Then there's PTSD. The hippocampus struggles with sorting memories, so the past doesn't always stay in the past. Smells, sounds, and certain situations can trigger flashbacks that feel like you're right back in it. Again, not weakness. It's the brain doing exactly what it was wired to do. Keep the trauma front and center so you never get caught off guard again. For some people, trauma shows up in the form of addiction or risky behavior. That ties back to adolescence. Remember, the reward system is spiking then. If you layer trauma on top of that, substances or thrill seeking can become a way to self soothe or escape the constant noise of survival mode. It's not that trauma survivors like bad choices, it's that their brains are reaching for relief. And it isn't just mental health. The Adverse Childhood Experience, or ACE study, found a direct link between childhood trauma and adult health problems like heart disease, autoimmune disorders, even shorter lifespans. Trauma isn't just in your head, it's stored in your body too. So when you see patterns like anxiety, depression, addiction, or physical illness, instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" we need to start asking, "What happened to me?" Because the science is clear. Trauma wires itself into our brains and bodies. But here's the part I want you to really hold on to. The same brain that was shaped by trauma also has the ability to heal. The brain is not set in stone. Yes, trauma changes the way it develops, but thanks to something called neuroplasticity, our brains can also rewire, even years later. That means healing is possible. It doesn't mean that it's easy, and it doesn't mean that it's quick, but it is real. One of the biggest ways that we can heal is through safe, supportive relationships. The same way trauma wires us to see the world as unsafe, healthy connections can teach the brain the opposite, that safety exists, that trust is possible. A hug, a kind word, consistency from someone who cares. These literally reshape the nervous system. Therapy is another huge piece. Approaches like trauma focused CBT, EMDR, or somatic therapies help the brain process memories that get stuck. Remember, the hippocampus struggling to file those memories? Therapy gives the brain a chance to put them in the right folder so they don't keep hijacking the present. Mindfulness, meditation, breathing exercises. Those aren't just buzzwords. They actually strengthen the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain trauma weakens. That means with practice, you can get better at calming the alarm system, better at staying grounded, instead of being swept away by fight or flight every time. And let's not forget the body. Trauma doesn't just live in the mind, it lives in the body too. That's why things like yoga, movement, or simple grounding practices can be powerful. They can help regulate the nervous system and rebuild brain body connections. Now, I won't sugarcoat it. Healing from trauma isn't a one and done fix, it's a process, a long game. But every step matters. Every safe relationship, every therapy session, every time you choose to regulate instead of spiral, you're literally teaching your brain a new way to exist. And science shows that it works. So, yes, trauma shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us. The same wiring that kept us in survival mode can, over time, be reshaped into a brain that knows how to live, not just endure. So, when we talk about brain development and trauma, it's not just science. It's people, it's you, it's me, it's anyone who's ever walked through the fire and wondered why life feels heavier than it should. Understanding how the brain develops gives us a new lens. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" we need to start asking, "What happened to me?" And that shift changes everything. Because when you see that your brain was shaped by survival, the shame starts to loosen its grip. You stop blaming yourself for being anxious or angry or distant. You realize that your brain did exactly what it needed to do to keep you alive. That's not weakness, that's resilience. That's survival. But survival isn't the end of the story. We're not meant to stay stuck in fight or flight forever. Healing is about teaching the brain that it's safe now. It's about rewriting the wiring that trauma once hijacked. And while that's a long road, it's a road worth walking because on the other side of survival is living, really living. So if you take nothing else from today, take this: your brain is not broken. It was shaped by your experiences, and it can be reshaped by new ones. Healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about building a future where the past doesn't control you anymore. And that's possible for me, for you, for all of us. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Another Broken Podcast. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone else that you think may need to hear it. As always, I'd love to hear from you, whether it's by commenting on this episode or shooting me an email at brokenmedia1984@gmail.com. Please take a moment to visit the podcast website at brokenmedia1984.podbean.com. Follow me on TikTok under the username Another Broken Dad and visit the merch store at etsy.com/shop// Another Broken Podcast. All of these are ways you can help this community grow and continue the flow of this free mental health resource. I appreciate each and every one of you that has taken the time out of your day to let me be a part of it. Every one of you are unique and amazing in your own way, and I can't wait for the world to see that. Until next time, I'm Nick Taylor. Have a good one, guys.